A force of elite American troops on board Black Hawk helicopters strike into the heart of the city of Mogadishu, Somalia.
We were invincible, we were Superman, and these were the Captain Kirks of Army aviation.
Their task, to abduct two sidekicks of a brutal Somali warlord.
We just came out of nowhere and dropped into the city.
This Special Forces mission is supposed to last less than an hour. But the operation spirals out of control.
We got a Black Hawk down! We got a Black Hawk down!
And then everything changed. Then it became a whole nother mission.
Thousands of Somalis surround the troops trapped inside enemy territory.
Once that Black Hawk crashed, it was immense. It was a mob.
The Americans launch a rescue mission that will push them to the limit.
The hornet's nest, so to speak, had been stirred up, and we were receiving fire at every intersection.
The battle would become the legend of Black Hawk Down. On the east coast of Africa lies the country of Somalia. Its capital city, Mogadishu. It is about to witness one of the bloodiest chapters in its history. US forces are launching a raid into a slum neighborhood near the city's Bakara market. On board the helicopters are the elite Special Forces unit, Task Force Ranger. Their mission, to capture and extract two henchmen of a suspected war criminal.
It was pretty simple. To get in, capture the targets, and to get out. If the leadership of the country said, this is what we want you guys to go do, that's what I wanted to go do.
For the young American soldiers, it's just another day at the office.
We were certainly mentally prepared for it, and we were certainly ready for whatever that they could throw at us.
We went where we wanted to go, and there wasn't anyone there that could tell us or make us do otherwise. There simply wasn't.
24 Pakistani UN.
3 miles away at the American headquarters, senior officers are directing the raid. Heading up Task Force Ranger is two-star General William Garrison.
William Garrison was an expert infantryman. He had served in the airborne. He had been an advisor in Vietnam.
Garrison has fought battles all over the world for nearly 3 decades.
General Garrison was a very much well-respected in the field of special forces.
Despite his men's confidence, Garrison is experienced enough to know this mission is full of risk. He's sending Task Force Ranger into one of the most dangerous cities in the world. But if it succeeds, he will strike a blow against one of the most ruthless men in Somalia, Muhammad Farah Aidid. Aidid hits the headlines in 1992 when he tries to seize control of a famine-ravaged Somalia. A United Nations relief force, including American troops, arrives to help feed the starving millions. But Aidid's clan attempt to control the supply of food.
Food was power. Clans would raid food convoys, take food, distribute it onto their own members. This then forced the United Nations to look at security measures.
Aidid's men massacre 24 UN peacekeepers. It makes him a wanted man. But Aidid just disappears.
General Aidid had basically gone underground. And so some of the thoughts of Task Force Ranger was, if we can't get a deed, let's look for the lieutenants.
Garrison has intelligence that two of Aidid's most trusted associates have been spotted in Mogadishu. These are the men the Task Force Ranger have been sent in to snatch.
If you could cut off those leaders, then that would make it very tough for Aidid.
Garrison's Task Force Ranger seems perfect for this extraction mission. At its heart are the Rangers, the US Army's elite light infantry. Fighting alongside them are highly trained helicopter teams and members of the secretive Special Forces unit, Delta Force.
Delta is arguably the best in the world of special operations. So when we're engaging what we considered gangs or street-level thugs, the battle was ours to lose.
The assault force of 160 men knows exactly what's expected of them. The mission has been planned to the finest detail. It is supposed to last less than an hour.
Speed and surprise was the most important elements of any of these raids.
Delta operators will land on the target building in Little Bird helicopters, storm inside and arrest Aidid's men. At the same time, Ranger units known as Chalks will rope in from Black Hawk helicopters. Chalks 1, 2, 3, and 4 will each secure a corner of the building and form a defensive perimeter. A convoy will drive to the target building, pick up the prisoners and the assault team, and bring them back to base. The operation will be monitored live from Garrison's headquarters. Video cameras mounted on helicopters follow the men as they go into action. By mid-afternoon, the airborne assault force has maneuvered above the target building. On board, Rangers Kenny Thomas and Randy Romalia prepare to fast rope in.
Very orchestrated and very rehearsed. Kick the rope out and then everybody just starts going. And it's a very fast and very efficient way to get people out.
We just came out of nowhere and dropped into the city. And it was almost that calm before the storm.
The Rangers secure the area around the target building. Inside, the Delta team move in on Aidid's men. It's no contest.
It took Delta Force about 15 minutes or so to get everybody secured.
The raid is going like clockwork.
They brought all the guys out of the building and we were like, yes, we scored. Like we knew we had done a good thing. So that left us on the target, waiting for our ride.
With the exception of one injured private, the Special Operations mission is a massive success.
It was another Sunday drive home that you would be able to complete the mission and let's go home now, boys.
The Americans and their prisoners begin to load up onto the convoy, but the Somalis are quickly amassing forces. Chalk 3, the Ranger unit including Kenny Thomas and Randy Romalia, are waiting near the target building. Soon, they are taking fire.
Started with one weapon being fired at you from one direction to multiple directions.
but it really wasn't that bad at that point. The reason it wasn't bad is because they were missing.
But as Kenny discovers, the Somalis are becoming more accurate.
I was on a knee firing down the road, and it hit me right here. Bam, it just knocked me backwards.
And I looked over, and Kenny is holding a magazine and shaking.
I thought the thing was gonna blow up or something. So I'm pulling the magazine. I looked over across the street, and Randy's over there. He's like almost laughing at me because he must have looked silly to him.
And the magazine kept that round from going through and hitting him in the chest. The center mass shot on Kenny.
And there's a perfect hole in it, and then on the back side, the whole back end of it's blown out. And you're like, wow, it's a game of inches, you know?
Every second the Americans spend in the danger zone gives the Somalis time to bring in more militiamen. And they have a lethal surprise for Task Force Ranger.
I looked up and I saw the black smoke coming from the tail section of the Black Hawk, and it went into a spin.
It looked odd. Like it shouldn't be flying like that. In the back of your mind, you knew that it was going down.
I heard it impact.
We got a Black Hawk crash in the city. Black Hawk crash in the city.
We're just waiting to go home when the first helicopter got shot down, and then everything changed. Then it became a whole nother mission.
The Somalis near the crash site swarmed towards the injured men of the downed helicopter.
You saw masses of people blocks away from us moving in that direction.
At his headquarters, Garrison and his team watched the disaster unfold. Among his staff is Ranger Larry Moores.
It was very busy, especially once the helicopter crashed in the city. Everybody's anxiety goes up a notch. We are very focused on how can we evacuate everybody from the city.
The two pilots are dead, but there are some survivors at the site.
Now General Garrison has to react. He has to now put in forces. This is a major concern because where the shoot-down occurred.
The situation is all the more difficult because the helicopter has crashed deep inside hostile territory.
Task Force Ranger is in an urban area that might be very difficult to get forces in and conversely get forces out.
Garrison orders another helicopter to drop medics and snipers onto the crash site. But that just buys time. He will also have to divert the convoy that's loaded up with the prisoners to pick up the survivors. But no one knows how long the convoy will take to arrive. He mobilizes the Rangers and Delta operators that are still on the ground near the target building. They follow orders to move to the crash site and form a protective cordon as soon as they can. Chalk 3 with Randy Romalia and Kenny Thomas are just 500 yards away from the crash site.
And immediately you knew you would run to help them. That would be your immediate reaction. Go help them. You see the bird coming down, we gotta go.
But Task Force Ranger's raid has already stirred up a hornet's nest.
So you have a whole mobilized city that could potentially be used against you at the crash site.
There was a sense of urgency for sure because you could see people moving down on the side streets heading towards the crash. So it was a foot race.
It's now their Ranger training kicks in.
Each man goes up to the wall, up to the corner, and you run across, one at a time.
It's shoot, move, communicate, put you guys in a position where they can get an effective field of fire, identify the bad guys. It was very automatic. We all knew what we needed to do.
As the American troops move close to the crash site, the fire intensifies.
I heard like a shrieking yell, and I looked over and I saw a Delta operator. His head flipped back and he just fell. It was probably the shortest, most violent thing I've ever witnessed. You remembered that we really viewed Delta as supermen. The only thing they didn't have were capes. So to see him shot and dropped like that was very sobering.
When people start going down and you see how matter-of-fact the death is, you realize, oh, well, if I die here, I die here. But I'm not gonna let it happen to the guys around me. Man, we weren't fighting for the flag, and we weren't fighting for freedom. At this point, you're fighting for each other. That's it. And that's when I turned around and went back and I was like, hey, you guys take care of each other. We're gonna make it out of here. That's the only way we're gonna make it out of here.
Kenny and Randy's unit continue to fight their way towards the Americans at the crash site, but they're still a block away. All the while, the Somalis are gaining in confidence and numbers.
Be advised, we're coming under heavy fire.
At headquarters, General Garrison gets more bad news. The convoy that's been diverted towards the crash site has run into trouble.
Down here ASAP.
Unfortunately, because of problems with direction, the convoy actually became lost within the city. Then add on people shooting at you, add on blockades of roads. It becomes a very difficult job.
Garrison realizes it will take far longer than he thought to get the convoy to the men at the crash site. He will have to use helicopters to support them for now, and this is risky. Somalis lie in wait with rocket-propelled grenades all over the city. A half-mile away from the crash site, a second Black Hawk is targeted. Garrison and his team watch in horror as the second helicopter goes down.
We got another helicopter down. We need combat search and rescue.
When the second one went in, it just ramped up the intensity.
Again, there are survivors. One of them is the Black Hawk's pilot, Mike Durant.
Whatever it took, whatever force we needed to put together, we were going to do that and bring everybody back off of the objectives.
Another Black Hawk ropes in 2 Delta snipers to protect Durant and his crew. They are quickly surrounded. The 2 Black Hawks have crashed half a mile away from each other, making the rescue mission even harder. And the convoy is still unable to break through to the first crash site. Half its force is now either wounded or dead.
We kept hearing on the radio the amount of casualties. All I wanted to do was be out there with them and be a part of the effort.
Garrison reaches a devastating decision. The rescue convoy is becoming combat ineffective. He has no choice but to pull them out. Back at the first crash site, Kenny Thomas hears that the convoy is being hauled back to base.
I can't believe it's happening. But the reality of it is that it is happening. And now what are you going to do about it?
Most of the American troops have made it to the roads and alleys surrounding the first crashed Black Hawk. Now, they begin to form a defensive perimeter around the downed aircraft and wounded men.
It was just putting guys in the right vantage points to minimize the amount of fire we were receiving from the enemy.
Kenny and Randy's Chalk 3 take up their positions near a main road. They are surrounded by a baying mob. They have to find a way to hold them off. So they turn to the squad's M60 heavy machine gun.
We needed that M60 there. And we were going to do whatever it took to keep that M60 there.
Enemy fire strikes the M60 gunner. Kenny takes over.
There was these two guys that were just popping their heads up over a little retaining wall. Just popping up and doing the Mogadishu machine gun man, which is not even aiming and just spraying rounds. So I got behind the gun, I waited for those guys to stick their heads up and fired off a couple rounds, like, bap, bap, bap. And then the gun goes click, click, chick, chick, chick. And I'm like, what the? It's out of rounds. Everybody's yelling at me, use the law. And I'm like, what? Because the law. And I had been carrying around this light anti-tank weapon, the law. I'm like, oh, I have a rocket launcher. So we fired it off. And that took down that position.
And that was very effective at dissuading the Somalis from coming back to that corner.
But now, there are fewer than 100 men protecting the crash site. The number of Somalis are steadily growing, and they outnumber the Americans at least 10 to 1. Most of them with close links to Aidid's clan.
The Somali clan member believes in clan first and last. They're going to take that to the nth degree, to such an extent that they're willing to die for it.
To make them even more fanatical, some are high on the local drug of choice.
There was some use of an addictive drug called cat. It's almost like being on amphetamine. It's going to provide you that extra oomph or that strength to carry on. You're fighting a tough foe.
We came in with the audacity that we could just kick in doors and take down who we wanted, and they were going to fight back. That's one of the places we went wrong. We completely underestimated their ability to play the game of urban combat.
At the American headquarters, a section of the original convoy struggles back to base. Garrison decides to send it straight back in with reinforcements. Larry Moores gets his chance to fight.
We knew we were going immediately back in, so very difficult to let them know after they'd just been shot up pretty good. Hey, we're heading right back in. There was a nervousness, but there also was a part of the way we do business in the Rangers.
The new convoy rolls out, but the Somalis are ready.
The Somalis had set up a huge roadblock. There was no maneuvering around. We were hit by a high volume of small arms fire to try and keep us from getting up there to that crash site. It was a pretty constant fight.
Larry and his men try to break through, but the whole of the city is now against them.
The hornet's nest, so to speak, had been stirred up, and we were receiving fire at every intersection. We knew that it was going to be a fight that day.
Larry's convoy is held up in the middle of the city, still short of the second crash site, and even further from the men on the ground at crash site 1. The news of the convoy's slow progress comes through to the men surrounded there.
I could hear the radio transmissions. And I remember we start looking at each other with concern, because we had never been on the ground this long, and the convoy had never received this amount of fire. That was where I really felt, I believe, discouraged.
At his base, General Garrison can see his vehicles cannot find a way through the city's streets. Eventually, he realizes he has no choice but to pull them back to base for a second time.
It must have been a most difficult decision for him, because he knew that potentially if he did nothing to save those individuals, he would have another repeat of maybe a massacre. Conversely, he had to weigh the risk of having even more casualties.
Reluctantly, the men in the convoy follow General Garrison's orders.
From my perspective, I wanted to fight into the objective, but from a leadership perspective, they're making a command and control decision. Do we really want to insert more Humvees who can't support themselves for a long fight? We just create a bigger problem.
The surrounded men of the crash sites are no nearer to being rescued. Night falls on Mogadishu. It's been just 3 hours since the mission began. Near the first crash site, Kenny and Randy defend their positions against the mob in the darkness.
They would fire randomly to try to see your muzzle flash. And then at that point, once they figured out where you were, they would try to maneuver on you.
The Somalis have a critical advantage. They know every inch of ground.
Remember, these are their neighborhoods. They're not our neighborhoods.
The Americans realize they stand no chance on the city's streets.
The thing that obviously made sense, and the Delta guys had already done this, was kick in a door, take over the house, and that's what we needed to do.
The men move inside and steel themselves for a long night ahead. By now, many of the men of Task Force Ranger are regretting not bringing an essential piece of kit into the battle.
We didn't anticipate being on the ground this long. A lot of us didn't bring night vision.
Basically, we got complacent because we were happy not to carry more gear. But we learned it's better to have and not need than to need and not have.
The Americans could have seen their enemy in near total darkness with their night vision goggles. Without them, the Somalis can close in.
The fighting along the crash site is very close combat. It's almost eye to eye, tooth to tooth.
The Americans are now fighting for their lives. At headquarters, General Garrison has already seen his operation descend into chaos. Not only are the men still trapped at the first crash site, but at the second crash site, all the men are either dead or captured. Desperate to salvage something, Garrison concentrates on the first crash site before it's too late. The only way to get his men out is to launch another convoy. But having failed twice, Garrison begins to realize he now needs support from other United Nations troops in Somalia.
How do you get the forces out? Well, you had to rely on something else. That something else were armored vehicles to break through those blockades and to protect the convoy. Who could provide that? It would only be the UN.
Getting this multinational force together will take time. It's something that the men on the ground may not have. Back at the first crash site, the men of Chalk 3 are reaching their lowest ebb.
I was exhausted at this point, and I got against the wall and I just slid onto the floor. And it looked like the floor was wet, and it was. It was wet from blood. You could actually smell the blood in the room. Once I realized I was sitting in it, I was tired enough to where I didn't even care to move. And then I remember picturing the White House at night, just like we've all seen on the news, where it's all lit up in white light at night, beautiful. And I remember thinking, no matter what decision is made there right now, there is nothing that can be done to help us. And that was very sobering, knowing that you're part of the greatest fighting force in the world, and no matter what decision is made at the highest level of government, there is nothing that can be done to help you in that particular situation, or in time to help get you out of that situation.
The Americans are paying the price for their overconfidence before the mission. They are now lacking more than just night goggles.
So at this point in the night, it was quite clear that we were running out of stuff.
They are low on ammunition, food, water, and medical supplies. At Chalk 3's position, one of their men is bleeding to death. They desperately need more morphine and IV bags. They have to be resupplied. Garrison faces another crucial decision. He has already lost 2 Black Hawks in the city, but a helicopter drop is the only way he can resupply his men.
Doing nothing is not an option. So he takes the responsibility. I have to send a helicopter out there to drop supplies, and that's what he does.
Garrison orders the launch of another Black Hawk helicopter. The pilot will need to be guided in by the men on the ground.
You have to land those supplies in a certain area where you can get access to them. You land on the wrong place, then all you're doing is giving supplies to the Somalis.
The mission's success depends on an infrared strobe carried by the American troops. Invisible to the Somalis, this small device's signal allows the pilot to spot the landing zone using his night vision sights. At the crash site, the men prepare for the drop.
This is Super 66 calling in for radio check, over. Reading you loud and clear.
The Rangers talk the helicopter in until the pilot can spot the strobe.
Okay, what's my altitude? It's 100 feet into the wind, altitude's good. Okay, that's 75 feet, and you're in a good position.
It looks like it's going to plan. Then, a hail of fire.
Taking small arms fire! Taking small arms fire!
He just had to sit there, hover, and take it. He knows that bird's getting hit, man. You know, and he has to sit there and take it because he knows there's guys counting on him. It's not about like, I don't know, man, it's pretty hairy. I don't want to go in there. What? Are you kidding me? That's not how it works.
The Black Hawk just manages to stay in the air and makes the drop. The Rangers receive their lifeline.
Well, the bird was hovering right over the building, so they just kicked them out, and it was, you know, much needed supplies that you could argue kept one of our guys alive. You know, he was going low on fluids. They didn't have anything else to keep his body from collapsing, and without IVs, he wouldn't have made it.
The Black Hawk struggles back to base riddled with bullets. The men on the ground can hold out a while longer, but they need General Garrison to find them a way out. At his headquarters, Garrison has had a breakthrough. Other UN forces have agreed to let him use their tanks and armored personnel carriers in the next convoy.
The Malaysians and the Pakistanis were committed to going in with us, which we give them a lot of credit for. They didn't have any trapped personnel on that objective, but they accepted that role to go out there with us and fight all night.
This heavily armored, multinational convoy will leave from Newport and head into the city. Half of the force will steer towards the second crashed helicopter to blow it up. They want to make sure its high-tech weaponry doesn't fall into enemy hands. The rest will push north towards the surrounded men at the first crash site. The rescue convoy moves out, 8 hours after the original raid was launched. Once again, Larry Moores is going in.
Anybody that was able to go out and fight that night, we took with us. So there was some intel analysts, there was a couple of wounded rangers who were able to take a cast off their arm because they wanted to be part of the mission.
Corporal Robert Lawhead, a Humvee driver assigned to the 10th Mountain Division, joins the rescue effort.
It didn't matter if it were Special Operations, Rangers, or even the 10th Mountain Division. It was just, we had people in trouble. And at that point, we knew it was us against the country. We didn't have time to think about it. We just did it.
The convoy battles towards the surrounded men. Again, the Somalis are ready.
It was a major firefight from block to block.
They were running out in the street, taking pot shots at us. You could look up on the roof or into a window and see them shooting. You could see guys get shot right in front of you. It was chaos.
This multinational force has never trained together, and the result is confusion.
As people start driving toward the crash site, the first two Malaysian armored vehicles get hit by RPGs.
Under heavy fire, the Malaysians head off in the wrong direction, causing more delay. At the first crash site, the waiting troops are feeling the strain.
There was no mistaking where that convoy was because the exchange of gunfire was unbelievable.
The rescue operation is less than half a mile away, but it may as well be on the other side of Africa.
And the radio is like, they're en route. They're not en route. They're en route. They're not en route. You know, at some point you just gave up.
The convoy battles through the night for nearly 3 hours.
If you can imagine people on the rooftops and in the alleyways and every door shooting at you, that's what they were trying to get through.
Finally, it breaks through.
I believe at that point we thought it was pretty much over.
And we were all very tired. And you kind of get the sense, okay, well, this thing's finally done. We can get our wounded guys out of here.
The men at the crash site load up their casualties and prepare to head off. Everybody thinks they're about to go home. But General Garrison has one final challenge for them. The Ranger Creed dictates the Americans can't leave a man behind. He wants his men to bring the body of the pilot of the crashed helicopter home.
This was something we had to do. It was the right thing. It was not a question that we were going to leave the body behind.
But the body is still trapped inside the crushed cockpit, and it will take time to free it. The delay could mean they lose the cover of darkness.
It became a fight against time, dismantling that aircraft to remove him, to bring him home with us.
Robert Lawhead's Humvee is called into action to try and free the body from the wreckage.
We would start attaching the tow strap to parts of the helicopter to try to pull, different parts of the frame apart so we could get more free access to the body.
The delay gives the Somalis more time to attack. In the house, Randy and Kenny's nerves are becoming shredded.
Why is it not happening? That's what you want to know. Let's get it done. Ricky Tick, come on. We were all very antsy, yeah, and the bad guys are starting to shoot again.
It was definitely the longest night in my life.
After 3.5 hours, the rescue team finally recovers the dead pilot's body. Only then can they head home.
We're getting the hell out of here. I don't care what's in front of us.
The convoy now has to fight through a heavily defended maze of streets towards a UN-held stadium in the north of the city. Worse, there's not enough vehicles for all the troops.
At that point, the plan was to run out next to vehicles.
Randy Romalia and Kenny Thomas now have to run a gauntlet of enemy fire. And they try to use the vehicles as cover.
It was a pretty intense fight still that morning.
It sounded like someone had picked up a handful of pebbles and were throwing it against sheet metal. That tink, 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 which was bullets bouncing off vehicles.
But soon the men on foot are left behind.
We got to the first intersection, and that vehicle didn't stop for us. It kept going.
And I'm a pretty fast guy, but I'm not that fast. They put the pedal down, man, took off. And that left about 30 of us ran from that city.
With their cover gone, Kenny and Randy suddenly find themselves more exposed to enemy fire.
It felt like somebody had walked up and struck me.
Looked like someone hit him with a baseball bat on the shoulder, like he just kind of did this thing.
So once I realized I had been shot, I reached into my body armor to check for an exit wound. And I started breathing in and out deeply, expecting to hear a gurgling. Lungs were still intact, I could still move, I could still breathe, which was of relief. But I knew that I was okay enough to keep moving forward.
Eventually, Kenny and Randy managed to scramble on board UN vehicles. Half an hour later, the convoy finally forces its way back to the safety of the UN-held stadium. Task Force Rangers' 14-hour ordeal is over.
As our task force came back together, it was a very emotional sight.
You know, when you look at each other, you don't have to say anything, because you know you gave it everything you could.
That was the first time I felt safe. But the reality of what had just taken place was starting to set in.
And the emotion just comes out of you. And I remember I started tearing up. And Randy walked up to me and he was asking me if I was okay. Like, he was worried about me, and he was the guy with a hole on his back. But at that time, it was enough to know he was alive, because I knew by then, we had lost guys. And I knew it was a big deal.
General Garrison now counts the cost of the mission. 18 Americans, 1 Malaysian peacekeeper, and 500 Somalis are dead. Worse still, the bodies of the crew from the second crash site are mutilated and dragged through the streets in front of video cameras. Garrison would later write to President Clinton, saying full responsibility rested with him and not in Washington. The situation gets worse. The Somalis broadcast images of the captured helicopter pilot, Michael Durant.
Michael Durant was held captive.
11 days after the raid, he is released. But the humiliation causes outrage in the US. In March 1994, US troops withdraw from Somalia. A year later, the UN also pulls out. In the years since the Black Hawk Down mission, the men who fought in Somalia remain proud of what they achieved. Aidid's 2 sidekicks were both captured alive.
We were there to accomplish a mission, and we did accomplish the mission. Yeah, we got our nose bloodied in the fight, but we won the fight.
The men of Task Force Ranger did everything they could to bring their comrades home. Their fighting spirit will ensure this operation will go down in Special Forces history.
You know that you had every opportunity to step out of the fight, but nobody did, because they were fighting for each other, because they knew if they stepped out of it, it would leave someone hanging. And you weren't gonna do that to your Ranger buddies. You weren't gonna do it to anybody. And that feeling sticks with you for life.